Lasse Jensen. This is the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, National Public Radio Denmark.
And this is Jon Roland, most notably with the Texas militia.
I'm going to be editing this, so it's not going to be used in a whole. I first wanted to, I'm going to ask you some of the same questions as the president asked you, but what role is Arizona playing in the rising interest of the border issue of?
Well, the main thing is that we now have a armed engagement between Mexican military forces and militia on our side of the border. This is something new.
Can you explain that? What kind of, can you explain how and when that?
Yeah, a short time ago, what appeared to be Mexican military, they were wearing uniforms, although their spokesman was one of what's called the Zetas, Los Zetas, the Z's. These were former Mexican special forces trained by the United States who went to work for the cartel as muscle and have since broken off and become their own cartel. So apparently a lot of them still wear uniforms. We can't be sure if we see a guy in uniform whether he's still in the military or just wearing the uniform. But what they've been doing is not just crossing the border with drugs, but setting up at least one outpost that we know of to defend their transshipment corridor and asserting what amounts to sovereignty over U.S. territory, warning Americans that if they see anyone carrying a gun in the area of operation that they have claimed, that they will kill them. So the situation has risen to a new level.
Is that the most important? Is that the most important case down there? That kind of catches the interest of the militia?
Well, of course, the thing is that it went to the point where the intruders fired on Americans. The Americans fired back and killed 2 of them. And the Zetas claimed stole their drugs as though they had a right not to have their drugs stolen. And the word we get is that the guys seized the drugs and destroyed them on the scene. So either that or it was a different incident involving a rival cartel. But our guys have the policy that if they find anyone with drugs, they destroy the drugs.
What is the most important thing that the militia or the groups that call themselves the Minutemen, group of Minutemen related groups, what is the most important task for them to do?
Well, their most important task is essentially to enforce our laws against illegals entering the country across the border at other than checkpoints. If someone sneaks across the border, that's an invasion under the laws of war. The borders are not now being adequately defended by U.S. personnel, so it leaves a gap in enforcement that's resulting in a lot of crime, including murder, rape. There was a recent incident of a rancher and his family being killed, he being beheaded, and the ranch burned down. So evidently, he was one who resisted the demands of the Zetas, apparently in that case, to surrender control of his ranch to them so they could move drugs across it. And the policy that the cartels have been practicing is what they call plata o plomo, silver or lead, will either accept our bribes or we'll kill you. And they're trying to gain effective control over territory along the border on our side of the border and along transshipment corridors leading into the United States, mainly to our metropolitan areas.
Arizona recently passed a law, and that's going to take effect from this, I think, 29th of July. Does that law have anything to do with the rising interest in what's going on at the border, do you think?
Well, it provides encouragement that there is support at the level of state government for resistance to foreign intruders. So we have state government on board, which we don't yet have in other bordering states. So that itself is encouraging from the militia viewpoint. Now, of course, the law is actually very weak. All it does is authorize Arizona police to make an arrest if they suspect someone is an illegal and turn them over to Immigration and Customs, which is pretty weak. I mean, they can do that anyway. But it just makes it official policy.
Can you try to explain to me just really shortly, because I don't think Danish listeners know this. I mean, because at least now in the rest of the U.S., except from Arizona when this law goes into effect, it is a federal matter to approach people who they believe live in the country legally. Can you explain that law and how it is that the Arizona law plays into that problem?
Okay.
Structure?
Well, the federal statute is authorized by the clause in our Constitution that delegates to Congress the authority to define crimes involving the laws of nations. The law of nations covers protecting your borders against outsiders. The question then arises, is that an exclusive delegation of power, or is it shared with the state? Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that forbids the states from exercising a similar power. And in fact, originally, when this country was founded, states administered naturalization laws. The Congress had preemptive power to prescribe the rules for naturalization, but the states actually carried it out. And so it's not a stretch for the states to be engaged in defense of their borders against foreign intruders. So, historically, there's adequate precedent for the states just flat out guarding the border, even prosecuting intruders under their own statutes. As it happens, all they are doing is turning them over to federal agents for prosecution under federal statutes. But constitutionally, there's nothing that bars states from enacting their own penal statutes.
Okay. You talked about foreign intruders before, and as I understood it when you talked about it, it's not necessarily immigrants, people who are coming here to work. Could you explain to me what you mean when you say foreign intruders?
Well, legally, someone is only an immigrant if they come in through a port of entry. And then either get a temporary visa or a long-term work visa, we'll call a green card. If they sneak across the border and somewhere other than a port of entry, that's a crime, and that makes the person an intruder. Even an American citizen is supposed to enter the country through a port of entry. I mean, we ourselves are not supposed to sneak across the border. So that's the key distinction. And where we're talking about here is people from other countries, not just Mexicans. A high proportion of them are nationalities of other kinds. They call them OTMs, other than Mexicans. A high proportion of those are from the Middle East. So when they sneak across the border, they become criminals and subject to criminal prosecution. A very high proportion of them are criminals of a violent kind, not just because they snuck across the border, but because they're coming here to commit crimes, especially violent crimes. Some defenders of immigrants will argue that on the average, immigrants are no more prone to be criminal than U.S. citizens are. And even if that were true, it's still, every time a criminal comes in who should have stayed on the other side of the border, that is one criminal too many.
You described earlier, you said that your militia or the people that you talk to and work with here in Texas, that they have efforts now, and particularly in Arizona where they had some. Can you try to explain the plans as much as you want to talk about that for the future?
Well, the call has come from Arizona asking other states to send contingents to provide a show of force. The hope is that if enough of us show up in force, that it will discourage the intruders. Right now, the Zetas, or their other cartelistas, have been crossing the border and encountering very little resistance. There have been a few armed encounters with border guards in which our border guards have withdrawn. Of course, they call in reinforcements. By the time the reinforcements arrive, the cartelistas have gone back over the border. But there have been armed engagements before between foreign intruders and U.S. personnel on our side of the border. This is the first time that the force on our side of the border have been civilian militia, and they didn't withdraw.
What do you say to the people who are who say that these people are armed and that's dangerous and they might even be violent?
Well, the question, of course, is violent in what way? We have reliable reports that the intruders are armed not just with AKs or M16s, but with crew-served weapons. That means larger guns that are mounted on a tripod and served with a belt of ammunition. That they are armed with 50 caliber weapons, with RPGs, rocket launchers. So they are armed with heavy stuff. This isn't just light infantry weaponry. So it's the opposition, especially the Zetas, are very well armed, and they're not carrying that kind of armament just for a tea party.
When you talk about that amount of weaponry or that size of weaponry, clearly we're not talking about only little immigrant families that are trying to come here to mow lawns and work in the restaurants and stuff like that. Who are the main forces behind what's going on and what you hear most at the border?
Well, the cartels are mainly in the drug trade. They're trying to smuggle narcotics, especially heroin and cocaine into the United States, although they've also been producing a lot of amphetamine. However, in many of the locations where they have taken up fairly stable positions, such as our inner cities, they are actually making more money with extortion than they are with selling drugs. There are entire neighborhoods where if you want to do business, you have to pay a tax to the cartel. And they even call it a tax. So, but this is inside the United States, in places like Los Angeles and San Diego and other cities, Tucson, Phoenix. And because everyone is afraid to complain about them or to testify against them, the local law enforcement is hampered in trying to do anything about it. And in fact, they are under threat themselves. The cartelistas have been threatening our law enforcement officers with death, not only for themselves, but their families. And even if they are courageous enough to resist that, that can't help but have an effect on them.
You talked about bankers before, how they played a role in this. Can you explain that too?
Yeah, we usually think of drug lords as the guys in places like, Sinaloa or in Medellin or other places. Medellin has been kind of shut down now, but as the guys in the producing countries. But they have to launder their money. And they mainly do it with the cooperation of a few large international banks, who typically take a cut, as much as 30%. Well, as near as we can figure out, the drug lords in these countries, producing countries, are not getting 30% themselves. They have overhead too, and after paying out for judges and lawyers and police and everybody else they have to pay off, they appear to be netting only about 5 or 10%. So with the bankers making the biggest share of the money, one has to ask who are the real drug lords.
Well, you're saying that the bankers, which when we talk about bankers, we're talking about one of the main power players in the U.S. or in the world, that they have an interest in the border issue indirectly because of the interest in the drug.
Right. Not necessarily as institutions. We think in most cases the participants are officers of those institutions who are simply corrupt even within the rules of their own organization. Of course, it's very easy for a corrupt bank official to hide what he's doing and keep the money himself, and he never shows up on the books as embezzlement or anything like that he could get into trouble for. And of course, at some point, his superiors, might suspect something, but they don't want to, upset that situation by raising the issue, so they wind up allowing it to occur.
Okay. Two more questions. If you had the power of influence to create a solution for the border or the immigration issue, what would that look like?
Well, there are a number of things we have to do. One of the things is to simply decriminalize these drugs. We tried prohibition of alcohol and it didn't work. It caused more trouble than it solved. So that wouldn't, however, as contrary to what some advocates of decriminalization think, end the drug problem. We haven't ended the alcohol problem, even though we're now only taxing it. narcotics are a real threat. And even in countries where there is no effective enforcement of drug laws, there is still a crime problem arising from drugs. Because, people who care to do so can get people hooked on drugs, and then those people become their slaves for other purposes like committing crime. There is no simple answer, but that's one way we can improve the situation. Another is that we're simply going to have to invest the money in manning, border control operations all along our border. Not just our southern border or our northern border, but our seacoast as well. And that's going to be very expensive. But we have to ask, how much criminal violence are we willing to tolerate in order to save the cost of doing that, or not doing that, by not doing that.
What about the immigration issue? What about the illegal immigrants? What are we going to do with them?
Well, it's generally recognized that there is a need for foreign labor that is real in the sense that American citizens probably aren't going to do it. So there needs to be a way to allow those people to come in, to work, and to go back. Now, we already have such a system in place. It could be made more efficient. I foresee that we're going to have to do something like put bracelets or other such things on all such foreign guest workers so that we know where they are at all times and can make sure that they leave when they're supposed to. So that's one of the things we can do. So we need to bring...
literally putting bracelets on them?
So actually they're usually put on their legs. Yeah. The cost of those are going to have to be brought down. Because we need an awful lot of them, and we can't afford to spend too much money on bracelets.
15 million or 11 million, something like that.
Yeah. So it's, but they've got some of these things down now to the size of rice grains that can be inserted under the skin, but they have a short range, only a few hundred feet. So getting them to be both long range and small and cheap then becomes a challenge. But it's a problem that could probably be solved.
I could imagine if that happens, if it was possible to mark them somehow, that a lot of groups on the net would say that this is a break, or this is a violation of civil rights, human rights.
Well, but the problem is that foreign nationals don't have the same civil rights we do. Everyone has certain basic civil rights, but foreign nationals lack one important right, which is the right to stay here. And if they're going to stay here for any period of time, they have to agree to submit to supervision. And once that rule is imposed, then we get the legitimate power of government to do things like putting bracelets on foreign visitors.
Okay. Last question was just how do you see the interest in this border issue? How do you see when you say that it's on the rise? Can you just describe to me what signs are they? What is it that makes you say that?
Well, here in Texas, we're gotten to the point where we have competing musters on any given weekend. Competing in the sense that there's more than one in different locations so that no one can attend all of them. And more guys are showing up to those musters. We're getting a lot of guys who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan who are freshly trained, very well trained, who want to, who have been, let's say, enlightened by their foreign experience and now want to use their skills to defend their country here. So as we get more and more of those, of course most of them are, when they return, are busy trying to get settled into their new lives, but most of them have enough spare time that they want to devote it to defending their country. So we've been seeing increases in participation like, oh, I don't know, 20, 30, 40% a month.
So you're talking about 30 to 40% every month? That's
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
So far since this year, yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks. There's a lot of mosquitoes here. I'm getting.
You got a creek down there.
Yeah.